The Velthari Consortium had watched the stars for 3,000 years, waiting for a new species to join the galactic community. They had protocols for everything. They had rules that were older than most civilizations. They had patience that stretched across centuries. When humanity launched its first ship beyond the solar system, the consortium celebrated. This was what they lived for. A new species meant new ideas, new art, new perspectives to add to the great collection of galactic knowledge. Ambassador Zyrith, a being made of living crystal that shifted colors with his emotions, was chosen to lead the welcome delegation. Zyrith had greeted 47 new species in his long career. He knew exactly how this would go. First, there would be years of careful observation, then decades of slow communication. Finally, after perhaps a century, the new species would be ready for their first face-to-face meeting with the consortium. Humanity did not follow the script. Within 6 months of detecting the consortium's observation probes, Earth had built 3 more interstellar ships and demanded a meeting. Not requested, demanded. Zyrith found this deeply unsettling. But the consortium valued politeness above all else. So they agreed. The meeting was set for a neutral space station on the edge of consortium territory. Zyrith arrived with representatives from 12 different species, all dressed in formal diplomatic attire, all prepared for the careful dance of first contact that had been perfected over millennia. The human ship arrived 2 hours early. This was considered extremely rude in consortium culture. But Zyrith reminded himself that the humans did not know their customs yet. He would teach them. He would be patient. The airlock opened and Lisa Murphy stepped through. She was a small woman by human standards, with gray hair pulled back in a simple knot and lines around her eyes that spoke of years spent solving difficult problems. She wore a plain blue suit with no decorations or symbols of rank. Behind her came 2 assistants, carrying tablet computers and nothing else. Zyrith's crystalline form shifted to a welcoming shade of blue. He raised his upper appendages in the traditional greeting gesture and began the formal welcome speech that had been used. For every first contact in consortium history, on behalf of the 17,000 species of the Velthari Consortium, I welcome you to the community of thanks, Lisa said. Can we sit down? These shoes are killing me. Zyrith stopped mid-sentence. His crystal structure flickered through several confused colors before settling on a pale yellow that indicated uncertainty. In 3,000 years, no one had ever interrupted the welcome speech. Of course. Please follow me to the diplomatic chamber. The chamber was a masterpiece of neutral design. The walls displayed slowly shifting patterns meant to calm the mind and encourage thoughtful discussion. The seating was arranged in a perfect circle to show that all species were equal. Soft music played, composed specifically to be pleasant to all known forms of hearing. Lisa sat down, kicked off her shoes under the table, and said, "So, how long have you folks been watching us?" Zyrith's form turned a deep purple, the color of profound discomfort. "We do not surveil. The consortium merely observes new species from a respectful distance until they are ready for contact." "Right. And in all that time you were observing us, you never thought to mention the asteroid?" The other delegates shifted uneasily. Zyrith felt his crystalline structure vibrating with stress. "I am not certain which asteroid you are referring to. It's the one in 2089. Big rock, about 2 kilometers across. Hit the ocean near Indonesia. 40,000 people died in the tsunamis." Lisa's voice was calm, but her eyes were hard. "Your ships were in our solar system. Your sensors are obviously better than anything we have. You saw it coming. The protocols of first contact clearly state that we must not interfere with the developing species. Such interference could damage their natural cultural evolution in 40,000 people." The silence stretched out. In Velthari diplomatic tradition, significant pause should last at least 4 hours to show proper respect for the gravity of the discussion. Lisa pulled out her tablet and began reading something on the screen. "What are you doing?" Zyrith asked after several minutes of uncomfortable silence. "Reading a book? Let me know when you're ready to actually talk. This is highly irregular. This was letting thousands of people die when you could have sent a warning." Lisa did not look up from her screen. "Take your time. I've got a really good mystery novel here. Xyrith consulted with the other delegates through private communication channels. None of them had ever encountered anything like this. The Grenth representative suggested that perhaps the humans were simply too primitive to understand proper diplomatic behavior. The Morvith delegate thought this might be some kind of test. Xyrith decided to try a different approach. Ambassador Murphy, I understand that you are upset about the asteroid incident. Perhaps we could discuss this matter through the proper channels. If you would submit a formal grievance to the Consortium Ethics Committee, they would review your concerns and provide a response within the standard time frame. Which is how long? Typically 18 to 24 years for a matter of this complexity. Lisa finally looked up from her tablet. She stared at Xyrith for a long moment, and then she did something that confused him completely. She laughed. 20 years to decide if you should have warned us about a giant rock falling from the sky? That's amazing. She shook her head. Okay, look, I'm not here to file complaints or wait for committees. I'm here because my government wants to establish trade relations. I want to know what kind of people we're going to be dealing with. We are not people. We are Velthari, figure of speech. My point is I need to understand how you think. And right now, I'm learning a lot. Lisa leaned forward. You've got rules for everything. Protocols, procedures, committees. Everything moves slow. Everything goes through proper channels. Am I right? Xyrith's form shifted to a cautious green. The consortium values order and careful deliberation. Hasty decisions lead to conflict and suffering. Sometimes hasty decisions save 40,000 lives. Lisa stood up and walked to the viewing window. Outside, stars stretched across the blackness of space. Here's what I think. You've been doing this for so long that you've forgotten why you started. All these rules, all these protocols, they're supposed to help people. But somewhere along the way, the rules became more important than the people they were meant to protect. That is a gross oversimplification of consortium. Philosophy. Maybe, but I've spent my whole career cutting through nonsense to get things done. I've made peace between groups that had been fighting for generations. You know how? By ignoring the rules that weren't helping and focusing on what actually mattered. She turned back to face him. So here's my offer. We can spend the next 100 years doing this the proper way, with committees and protocols and formal grievances. Or we can skip all that and just talk. Like actual people. Figure out what we both want and how to make it happen. Xyrith felt something he had not felt in centuries. Uncertainty. Every instinct told him to follow the protocols, to insist on proper procedure, to guide these strange new beings through the established process of first contact. But something in Lisa, Murphy's eyes, made him hesitate. There was no hostility there, no hidden agenda. Just a simple, honest desire to connect. His crystalline form slowly shifted to a color. He had not displayed in diplomatic chambers for a very long time, the warm orange of genuine curiosity. It's very well. Ambassador Murphy, let us talk. Lisa smiled. Great, and call me Lisa. Now, tell me about these trade agreements you mentioned. I've got some ideas. The meeting was supposed to last 3 days. It lasted 3 weeks. By the end, Xyrith had learned more about humans than the consortium's observation teams had gathered in decades. He had also developed what could only be described as a headache. Despite not having a physical brain, humans, he realized, were going to be trouble. He had no idea how right he was. 6 months after first contact, humans had spread through consortium space like water, finding cracks in stone. They were everywhere. Trading posts, research stations, cultural exchanges. The consortium had never seen a species move so fast. Most new civilizations took centuries to establish their first permanent presence beyond their home system. Humans had built 7 outposts in half a year. Commander Daniel Price of the Earth vessel Meridian was delivering medical supplies to a colony on the Outer Rim when he received the distress call. Kethros Station, a neutral trading hub that served as a meeting point for dozens of species, had gone silent. The last transmission mentioned armed intruders and hostages. Daniel was 45 years old, former Navy officer who had spent 20 years keeping the peace in difficult places. He had gray at his temples and scars on his hands from fights he preferred not to talk about. When the distress call came through, he changed course immediately. "Sir Kethro's station is outside our jurisdiction," his first officer said. "Consortium protocols require us to report the incident and wait for an official response team." "How long will that take?" "Based on standard response times, approximately 6 to 8 days for initial assessment. Then another 2 weeks for deployment of appropriate resources." Daniel was already plotting a new course. "We can be there in 4 hours. Set a course." "But sir, the protocols there are people in danger." "We're going." The Meridian arrived at Kethro's station to find chaos. The station's communication array had been destroyed. Emergency lights flickered through viewports. 3 Consortium patrol ships floated nearby, waiting for instructions from their commanders. Daniel opened a channel to the patrol ships. "This is Commander Price of the Earth vessel Meridian. What's the situation?" A Vel-3 captain responded, her crystalline voice tight with stress. "The Grenth Collective has taken control of the station. They have 47 hostages, including 3 humans. We are awaiting guidance from Consortium's Central Command. They claim that a merchant from the station cheated them in a trade deal. They demand compensation and a formal apology from the Consortium Commerce Board. And if they don't get it," the Vel-3 captain's voice dropped, "they have threatened to execute 1 hostage every 12 hours until their demands are met." Daniel did the math in his head. 6 to 8 days for an official response? That meant at least a dozen hostages would die before the Consortium even finished their initial assessment. "I'm going over there," he said. "Commander, that is extremely inadvisable. The Grenth are a warrior species. They do not negotiate with individuals, only with official representatives of recognized governments." "Then I'll be an official representative." "You do not have the authority, Daniel. Cut the channel." He walked to the airlock, stopped to grab a bottle of water from the ship's mess, and then crossed the gap between his ship and the station alone. The Grenth were waiting for him in the main docking bay. They were massive creatures, nearly 3 meters tall, with hard shells covering their bodies and multiple limbs that ended in sharp claws. Their leader, a scarred veteran with one eye missing, stepped forward and made a threatening display. "You dare enter our territory?" the leader growled. "We will add you to our hostages." "It's fine," Daniel said. "But first, can I ask you something?" The Grenth leader stopped, confused by the calm response. "Ask, what exactly did this merchant do to cheat you?" The leader's remaining eye narrowed. "He sold us navigation data that was incomplete. Because of his lies, 3 of our ships were lost in an asteroid field. 17 of our brothers died." Daniel nodded slowly. "That's terrible. I'm sorry for your loss. We do not want your sorry. We want justice." "Okay. What would justice look like to you?" The Grenth leader seemed thrown off by the question. In his experience, other species either threatened force or offered empty diplomatic words. No one had ever simply asked what he wanted. The merchant must face trial under Grenth law. He must pay compensation to the families of the dead. And the Consortium must acknowledge that their commerce regulations failed to protect us. "Those seem like reasonable demands," Daniel said. "Have you actually asked the Consortium for these things?" "We filed a formal complaint through the Commerce Board 8 months ago. They acknowledged receipt and said they would review the matter according to standard procedures, and then nothing happened."
Nothing.
"Our brothers are dead, and the Consortium talks about procedures." Daniel sat down on a cargo crate, moving slowly to show he was not a threat. "I understand why you're angry. If someone killed 17 of my people and then ignored my complaints, I'd be pretty upset too." The Grenth leader made a rumbling sound that might have been agreement. "Then you understand why we took this action." "I understand it. I don't think it's going to get you what you want, though." "Explain." "Right now, you've got hostages. The Consortium is going to send a response team eventually, and they're going to be focused on getting those hostages back. Your complaint about the merchant? It's going to get buried under all the paperwork about this incident. You might get some compensation to end the crisis, but the merchant probably walks free, and nothing changes in the system that let this happen." The Grenth leader's claws clicked against the deck. Then what do you suggest? Let the hostages go. All of them. Right now? And receive nothing in return? You insult us. You won't receive nothing. You'll receive something much more valuable than compensation. Daniel leaned forward. You'll receive humans who owe you a favor. The Grenth leader made a sound of contempt. Humans are new to this galaxy. You have no power, no influence. Not yet. But we're everywhere, and we remember things. You let those hostages go? And every human in Consortium space is going to hear about the Grenth who showed mercy when they didn't have to. We'll tell that story. We'll remember it. And when you need help someday, when some other species tries to cheat you or ignore your complaints, you'll have friends who will stand with you. Words, empty promises, maybe. But here's the alternative. You kill hostages, and humans will remember that too. Not for revenge. We don't do revenge. But we do hold grudges in our own way. Every human trader will avoid Grenth ships. Every human diplomat will raise concerns about Grenth reliability. Every human engineer will find reasons why their projects can't use Grenth materials. Nothing illegal. Nothing violent. Just a million small inconveniences forever. The Grenth leader studied Daniel with his single eye. You are threatening us. No, I'm telling you the truth about how my species works. We're stubborn, and we have long memories. You can have us as friends, or you can have us as a permanent minor annoyance. Your choice? The silence stretched out. Daniel could hear the breathing of the Grenth warriors around him, could feel the tension in the air. One wrong word, one sudden movement, and this could all go very wrong very fast. Finally, the Grenth leader made a decision. The merchant who cheated us, he is among the hostages. I didn't know that. If we release the others, we'd keep him. He will face Grenth justice for his crimes. Daniel thought about it. The merchant had sold bad data that killed 17 people. In human terms, that was at least negligent homicide. What does Grenth justice look like for something like this? He will work in our labor camps until he has earned enough to compensate the families of the dead. It will take many years, but he will survive if he works hard. That sounds fair to me. Daniel stood up and extended his hand. Do we have a deal? The Grenth leader looked at the hand, then at Daniel's face. Something passed between them, some understanding that went beyond words. The leader reached out with one massive claw and carefully grasped Daniel's hand. We have a deal, human. I am Krath of the Grenth Collective. I will remember your name, Daniel Price, and I'll remember yours. The hostages were released within the hour. The Consortium response team arrived. 3 days later to find the crisis already resolved, and the Grenth returning to their territory with their prisoner. The official report noted that the situation had been handled in an irregular manner that did not follow established protocols. It recommended a review of procedures to prevent such incidents in the future. Daniel did not read the report. He was already responding to another distress call, this time from a mining colony dealing with equipment failures. He arrived 2 weeks before the official repair team and fixed the problem. Himself, it was just what humans did. The Morvith Empire had controlled galactic commerce for 12,000 years. They were an ancient species, reptilian in appearance. Scales that shifted color depending on their mood and long tails that they used for balance and expression. They had built the first interstellar trade routes. They had established the currency systems that most of the galaxies still used. They owned the information networks that made long-distance commerce possible. When human traders began appearing in Consortium markets, the Morvith barely noticed. New species came and went. Most of them spent centuries learning how galactic trade worked before they became significant players. The Morvith had time to prepare for any real competition. They were wrong. Human traders did not follow the established patterns. They did not spend years building relationships with established merchant houses. They did not slowly work their way into existing supply chains. Instead, they went directly to producers and consumers, cutting out the middlemen that the Morvith had relied on for millennia. Worse, humans offered something the Morvith could not match: flexibility. A Morvith trade deal required months of negotiation, extensive contracts, and approval from multiple levels of imperial bureaucracy. A human trader could shake hands on a deal in an afternoon and deliver goods the next week, within 2 years. Human merchants had captured 15% of the synthetic fuel market and were making serious progress in rare minerals. The Morvith Empire decided it was time to act. First, they tried economic pressure. They raised tariffs on human goods, restricted access to their communication networks, and pressured their allies to do the same. Human traders simply found alternative routes and built their own communication systems. Then they tried legal action. They filed complaints with the Consortium Commerce Board, claiming that humans were violating centuries-old trade agreements. The complaints worked their way through the bureaucracy, while human market share continued to grow. Finally, they tried force. 3 human cargo ships were seized by Morvith patrol vessels on charges of carrying contraband. The ships were impounded, their crews detained, and the Morvith Empire announced that any human vessel entering their territory would face similar treatment. The Consortium expected war. Humans had shown themselves to be aggressive and unpredictable. Surely they would respond to this provocation with military force? The Morvith had prepared for this. Their fleet outnumbered Earth's by 60 to 1. It would be a short war. Instead of warships, sent Karen Mitchell. Karen was 53 years old, with short brown hair and glasses that she was constantly pushing up her nose. She had worked as an accountant for 30 years, most recently for a small firm that handled the books for several human trading companies. When the Morvith seized her employer's ships, she lost her job. Karen did not get angry. She did not demand justice or call for military action. She did what she had always done when faced with a problem. She looked at the numbers. The Morvith Empire had been in existence for 12,000 years. In that time, they had accumulated vast amounts of data. Trade records, shipping manifests, tax documents, financial reports. Most of this information was technically public, buried in archives that no one ever bothered to examine. Karen examined it. She started with the cargo ships. The Morvith claimed they were carrying contraband, but the ships' manifests were clear. Karen obtained copies of the manifests from the shipping companies, then compared them to Morvith's customs records. The discrepancies were obvious. From there, she expanded her investigation. She looked at Morvith tax records and found that imperial revenues did not match reported trade volumes. She examined shipping logs and discovered that certain vessels seemed to disappear from tracking systems for days at a time before reappearing with different cargo. She analyzed financial transfers between major Morvith trading houses and found patterns that suggested massive fraud. It took her 3 weeks. She worked alone in her apartment, using a standard computer and publicly available databases. When she was finished, she had documented 12,000 years of financial crimes. The Morvith Emperor had been skimming from the imperial treasury. Since he took the throne, the High Council had been accepting bribes from trading houses in exchange for favorable regulations. The military leadership had been selling weapons to enemy species and blaming the losses on pirates. The entire economic system was built on corruption, and Karen had the receipts. She did not try to blackmail anyone. She did not demand the release of the cargo ships or seek compensation for her lost job. She simply compiled her findings into a clear, readable report and sent copies to every major news organization in Consortium space. The story broke like a bomb. Species that had dealt with the Morvith for centuries suddenly discovered they had been cheated. Trading partners realized that the favorable deals they thought they had negotiated were actually covers for money laundering. The Morvith currency, which had been the standard for galactic commerce, began to collapse as investors fled. Within 6 months, the Morvith Empire was in chaos. The Emperor was overthrown by his own council, who were then arrested by the military, who were then overthrown by popular uprising. Civil war spread across Morvith space as different factions fought for control of what remained of the Empire. The human cargo ships were quietly released. The crews returned home without fanfare. The Morvith were too busy fighting each other to worry about a few small vessels. Karen Mitchell became famous. Though she never sought attention, news organizations across the galaxy wanted to interview the human accountant who had destroyed an empire with a spreadsheet. She declined most requests, saying she was not comfortable with public speaking. When one persistent journalist finally convinced her to answer a few questions, she seemed puzzled by the attention. "I just did my job," she said. "When numbers don't add up, you investigate. When you find problems, you report them. That's what accountants do." "But you must have known that releasing this information would cause chaos," the journalist pressed. "Didn't you worry about the consequences?" Karen thought about it for a moment. "The Morvith seized our ships and threw our people in prison. They were trying to destroy our businesses because we were competing too well. That seemed wrong to me." She shrugged. "I believe in fair dealing. If you're going to be in business, you should be honest about it. The Morvith weren't honest, so I made sure everyone knew. Some people are calling you a hero. That's silly. Heroes do brave things. I just read documents and made charts." She paused. "Though I will say, it felt good to balance those books. 12,000 years of fraud, and nobody ever bothered to check the math. That's just lazy." The fall of the Morvith Empire reshaped galactic commerce. New trading systems emerged, many of them based on human models of flexibility and transparency. The Consortium Commerce Board, embarrassed by how long they had failed to notice the corruption, began implementing reforms. Karen Mitchell went back to accounting. She found a job with a new firm, one that specialized in auditing interstellar businesses. She was very good at it, and across the galaxy, species began to whisper a new warning. Be careful dealing with humans. They ask questions. They look at your books. They remember everything. It was not the reputation that humanity had expected to develop among the stars, but it was effective. The consortium had studied humans for 5 years and still could not understand them. They were not conquerors, despite having the aggression and adaptability that usually marked conquering species. They showed no interest in territorial expansion. They had no desire to spread their beliefs or convert other species to their way of life. They were not isolationists either. They reached out to everyone, eager to trade and talk and learn. They were simply present, everywhere, all the time. And they kept helping people. The Athrani were an old species. Insectoid beings with delicate wings and compound eyes that saw in spectrums most other species could not imagine. They had been part of the consortium for 8,000 years, quiet civilization that kept to themselves and rarely made trouble. They were known for their art, their music, and their agriculture. Their homeworld was a garden, carefully cultivated over millennia. When the blight came, it spread faster than anyone could have predicted. A fungal infection, probably carried by a cargo ship from somewhere in the outer territories, attacked the root systems of the Athrani's primary food crops. Within 3 months, 60% of their agricultural production was dead or dying. The Athrani chancellor, elder named Chrysith, sent an emergency request to the consortium. Her people were facing famine. They needed food shipments immediately, along with agricultural specialists who could help them fight the blight. The consortium responded according to protocol. An emergency committee was formed to assess the situation. Preliminary reports were requested from agricultural experts across member species. A funding proposal was drafted for review by the Economic Council. The process would take time. But the consortium assured Chancellor Chrysith that everything was being handled properly. Chrysith calculated how long her food reserves would last. Not long enough. The first human ship arrived 4 days after the news of the blight reached Earth. It was a small vessel, converted cargo hauler with a crew of 12. They had loaded their hold with grain and medical supplies and set out without waiting for official authorization. "We heard you needed help," the captain said when Chrysith met them at the spaceport. "What can we do?" Chrysith was confused. "You came to help? But Earth has no treaty obligations to the Athrani. We have never even traded with your species," the captain, a young woman named Amy Peters, shrugged. "You're hungry. We have food." Seemed pretty simple. More ships followed. Human relief organizations, many of them funded entirely by private donations, sent vessel after vessel loaded with supplies. Within 2 weeks, there were over 100 human ships in Athrani space. and more were on the way. But the strangest thing was not the ships. It was the people. They were volunteers. Ordinary humans who had heard about the famine and decided to help. Teachers, doctors, farmers, engineers, cooks, builders. They had raised money for their own transportation. They had taken leave from their jobs. Some had quit their jobs entirely. They came to Athrani Prime and asked where they were needed. Chrysith did not know what to make of them. In her long experience, when one species helped another, there was always a price. Favorable trade agreements, political alliances, cultural concessions. Help was a form of investment, and investors expected returns. She assigned her advisors to discover what the humans wanted. They interviewed human volunteers, examined their ships for hidden weapons or surveillance equipment, analyzed the food shipments for contaminants or tracking devices. They found nothing suspicious. After 3 weeks of investigation, Chrysith decided to ask directly. She requested a meeting with the senior human coordinator, a retired school teacher from a place called Wisconsin named Beth Collins. Beth was 62 years old, with white hair and a kind face that seemed permanently set in a gentle smile. She had been organizing volunteer rotations and supply distributions with the efficiency of someone who had spent decades managing classrooms full of children. Mrs. Collins, Chrysith said, her wings twitching with nervous energy, "I must ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." "Of course, Chancellor." "What would you like to know? What do you want from us?" Beth looked puzzled. "I'm not sure I understand the question." "Your people have sent ships and supplies and workers. You have helped us when we had no claim on your assistance. In my experience, such help always comes with expectations. What are yours?" Beth was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "Chancellor, I taught elementary school for 35 years. Do you know why I became a teacher? I do not. Because I liked helping kids learn. That's it. I didn't do it for money, because teachers don't make much money. I didn't do it for status, because teachers don't get much of that either. I did it because helping people feels good." She smiled. "When I heard about what was happening here, I thought, those folks need help. I can help. So I came. But surely you expect something in return. Gratitude, perhaps? Political influence? Economic advantages for your species. I mean, it's nice when people say thank you. But that's not why we do it." Beth leaned forward. "Chancellor, I know this probably seems strange to you. But humans, we have this thing. When we see someone suffering, most of us feel it. Not because we're related to them or we owe them anything. Just because they're alive and they're hurting. It's hard to explain if you don't feel it." "Empathy," Chrysith said. "We know the concept. But empathy for strangers? For members of other species you have never met? This seems extreme. Maybe it is. But it's who we are." Beth stood up and walked to the window. Outside, Chrysith could see human volunteers working alongside Athrani farmers, clearing infected crops and planting new ones. Those people out there, they gave up their vacations, their savings, sometimes their careers, to come here. Nobody made them do it. Nobody's paying them. They just wanted to help. Chrysith watched the humans work. They were clumsy compared to Athrani farmers, their movements awkward and slow. But they worked hard, and they smiled as they worked, and they laughed with the Athrani, who were teaching them what to do. "I have led my people through 3 wars, Chrysith said quietly. "I have negotiated treaties with species that wanted to destroy us. I have faced challenges that would have broken lesser leaders. But I do not know how to respond to this." "You don't have to respond," Beth said. "Just let us help. And maybe someday, if you meet someone who needs help, you'll remember how you felt right now, and you'll help them too. That's how it works. Kindness spreads." Chrysith felt something wet on her face. She touched her cheek and realized she was crying. Athrani did not cry often. It was considered a sign of weakness among her people. She did not feel weak. She felt something else entirely. Over the following months, the blight was contained and the crops were replanted. Human agricultural scientists worked with Athrani farmers to develop resistant strains. Human doctors treated Athrani, who had fallen ill from malnutrition. Human builders repaired infrastructure that had been neglected during the crisis. When the last volunteer ships prepared to leave, Chancellor Chrysith addressed her council. "We have received a gift," she told them. "Not food or medicine or expertise, though we received all of those things. We have received proof that kindness can exist without expectation of reward. The humans call it unconditional. I did not believe such a thing was possible among intelligent species." "What do you propose we do, Chancellor?" one counselor asked. Chrysith considered the question carefully. "I propose we learn from them. And I propose we petition for associate membership in whatever alliance the humans are building. I want our people to be part of whatever they are creating." The petition was approved unanimously. The Athrani became the first species to formally request integration with human civilization, rather than the other way around. They would not be the last. Across the galaxy, the story of the Athrani famine spread. Species that had never encountered humans began asking questions. Some were suspicious, convinced that the humans must have a hidden agenda. Others were curious, wondering if perhaps they had been wrong about how the universe worked. And some, quietly, began to hope that maybe kindness was not as rare as they had always believed. The consortium did not know how to classify this development. There was no protocol for dealing with a species that helped others simply because it felt like the right thing to do. They would have to create one ambassador. Xyrith had not been the same since first contact with humanity. His crystalline structure, once a perfect lattice of light and color, had developed permanent gray streaks. Other Velthri recognized these marks as signs of chronic stress, the kind that came from facing problems that could not be solved through proper procedure. For 5 years, Xyrith had served as the consortium's primary liaison to humanity. He had watched them spread across the galaxy. He had observed their strange customs and unpredictable behavior. He had tried, repeatedly, to explain to them why certain protocols existed and why they should follow them. They never listened. Not out of disrespect, but simply because they did not see the point. Why should we wait 6 months for a committee to approve a trade route when we can survey it ourselves in 2 weeks? Why should we submit a formal grievance when we can just talk to the people involved and work something out? Why should we follow a procedure that doesn't make sense just because it's always been done that way? Questions like these kept Xyrith awake at night, his crystalline form humming with anxious energy. He had spent 3,000 years as a diplomat. He had never encountered a species that simply ignored the rules they found inconvenient. The worst part was that it worked. Human methods should have caused chaos. They should have led to conflicts and misunderstandings and diplomatic disasters. Instead, problems got solved. Crises were averted. Species that had been enemies for centuries found themselves cooperating because some human had asked them.
Why they were fighting, Xyrith finally requested an audience with the Consortium High Assembly.
It was an unusual step. The High Assembly normally dealt with matters of species-wide importance, wars, treaties, existential threats. But Xyrith believed that humanity qualified as an existential threat. Just not in the way anyone expected. The assembly chamber was an enormous space, designed to accommodate representatives from thousands of species. Xyrith stood in the center, his crystalline form projecting his words to every corner of the room. Distinguished members of the assembly, he began. I come before you today to issue a warning about humanity. The chamber stirred. Warnings about new species were not uncommon, but Xyrith was known for his calm temperament and careful judgment. If he was concerned, the situation must be serious. As you know, I have served as our primary liaison to the humans for 5 years. In that time, I have observed their behavior, studied their culture, and attempted to guide them toward proper integration with the consortium. I must report that these efforts have failed. The assembly speaker, an ancient being whose species had been founding members of the consortium, leaned forward. Failed how, Ambassador? Our reports indicate that human integration has been remarkably successful. Trade is flourishing. No significant conflicts have occurred. Several species have even requested closer ties with human civilization. That is precisely the problem, Xyrith said. Confused murmurs rippled through the chamber. Allow me to explain. The humans are not dangerous in the way we understand danger. They do not conquer. They do not destroy. They do not seek to dominate or control. They do something far more insidious. Xyrith's form flickered through several colors before settling on a deep blue of serious concern. They make you like them. The assembly waited in silence. They arrive with their chaos and their informality and their complete disregard for proper procedure. They ignore protocols that have existed for millennia. They cut through bureaucracy that we have spent centuries carefully building. They solve problems that we have been managing through appropriate channels. And this is a threat. The speaker asked. Consider what has happened since first contact. The Athrania, species that valued isolation and self-reliance, have requested associate membership in human alliances. The Grenth, a warrior culture that trusted no one outside their collective, have established trade partnerships with human merchants. The Morvith Empire, which dominated galactic commerce for 12,000 years, has collapsed entirely. The Morvith collapse was due to internal corruption, not human interference. The corruption was exposed by a human accountant who simply decided to look at their financial records. A single human, with no official standing and no authority, destroyed an empire because she believed in transparency. Xyroth's voice rose. Do you not see the pattern? Humans do not attack civilizations. They question them. They ask why things are done a certain way. They point out inefficiencies and contradictions. And when they find something that does not make sense to them, they simply ignore it and do things their own way. The chamber was very quiet now. I've spent 5 years with them, Xyrith continued. 5 years of watching them operate, of trying to understand how they think. And I must confess something to this assembly. Something that shames me deeply. His crystalline form turned a dull gray, the color of confession and vulnerability. I find myself beginning to agree with them. Shocked gasps echoed through the chamber. I find myself questioning traditions my people have held sacred for 10,000 years. I find myself wanting to cut through bureaucracy and simply solve problems. I find myself thinking that perhaps efficiency matters more than procedure, that perhaps results matter more than protocol. Xyrith's voice dropped to almost a whisper, but the acoustics of the chamber carried every word. I find myself wanting to help others simply because I can, without expecting anything in return. This is what humans do to you. They do not conquer your civilization. They do not destroy your culture. They make you question it yourself. They make you see the flaws you have been ignoring. They make you want to be better. The assembly speaker was silent for a long moment. Finally, she asked, "And you consider this a threat?" "I consider it the greatest threat we have ever faced. Because it is not an attack we can defend against. It is not an invasion we can repel. It is an idea, and ideas are contagious." Xyrith looked around the chamber at the thousands of representatives from hundreds of species. Every one of you has encountered humans by now. Every one of you has probably had at least one conversation that made you think, perhaps they have a point. Perhaps we could do things differently. He saw it in their eyes. The recognition, the discomfort, the knowledge that he was right. My recommendation to this assembly is to issue a formal advisory to all consortium species. Warn them that prolonged contact with human envoys may result in fundamental changes to cultural values, governing structures, and species identity, not through force, not through deception, simply through exposure to a different way of thinking. The debate that followed lasted 3 days. In the end, the advisory was approved by a narrow margin. It was distributed to every species in the consortium, a formal warning that contact with humans should be approached with caution. When the humans heard about the warning, they were confused. Their Secretary of Interstellar Relations, a man named Paul Henderson, who had worked his way up from a small-town mayor to leading humanity's diplomatic corps, called Xyrith personally to ask about it. "I read the advisory," Paul said. "I have to admit, I'm a little hurt. All we've been trying to do is make friends and do business. Is that really so bad?" Xyrith's crystalline form shifted to a complicated mix of colors that humans had no names for. "It is not bad, Secretary Henderson. It is simply unprecedented. The galaxy has operated according to certain principles for a very long time. Your species challenges those principles merely by existing. We're just being ourselves. I know. That is what makes you so dangerous. Paul laughed. Xerath had never understood human laughter. It seemed to occur at inappropriate moments and could mean dozens of different things depending on context. Ambassador, can I ask you something? Of course. In those 5 years you spent studying us, did you ever consider that maybe the galaxy's principles needed to be challenged? That maybe some of those traditions and protocols exist because nobody ever questioned them, not because they're actually good? Xerath was quiet for a long moment. I have considered it, yes, and I find the question deeply uncomfortable, which is exactly the problem. Xerath's form flickered with something that might have been amusement. You have given me much to think about, Secretary Henderson. I suspect you will continue to do so for many years to come. Is that good or bad? I genuinely do not know. Perhaps that is good in itself. After the call ended, Paul sat in his office and looked out the window at the stars. Somewhere out there, 1,000 different species were reading a warning about humanity. They were being told that contact with humans might change them in fundamental ways. Paul wondered if any of them would listen. He hoped they would not, because change, he had always believed, was how the universe grew. And the galaxy had been standing still for far too long. Outside, the stars waited, and humanity, as it always had, kept reaching toward them. Not to conquer, not to destroy. Just to meet whoever was out there and say hello. It was, Paul thought, a pretty good way to explore the universe. The advisory remained in effect for decades. Species cited it as a reason to limit contact with human envoys, to approach trade negotiations with caution, to be careful about cultural exchange programs. And yet, one by one, they kept coming. Drawn by curiosity, by economic opportunity, by simple loneliness, in the vast emptiness of space. They came to trade and talk and argue and laugh. They came because humans were interesting and strange and somehow, despite everything, good company. The advisory could not prevent this. Nothing could. Because in the end, the galaxy did not want to avoid humanity. It wanted to understand why these strange, chaotic, impossibly kind creatures seemed so happy, and that question, once asked, could never be unasked.